Hello and welcome to the first exciting episode of Media Outlier, the video podcast that explores key topics and challenges of the media industry. I'm thrilled to start this journey with our guest from London, Fabiano Madonna, Digital Analytics Manager at Publicis Media. Welcome, Fabiano.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're here today to talk about such a critical aspect of modern marketing, media effectiveness and long-term brand building. We're delighted to have a global panel of esteemed experts joining us. Ian Barnard, Strategy Director at Creative Business Company.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mark Evans, Founder and Fractional CMO at Marketing Spark.
Thank you.
Richard Last, Executive Creative Director at Marker House, Hogarth WPP. Francesca Mennella, Associate Director, Performance Content at Publicis Media.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Ian Gibbs, Insight and Planning Director at Data and Marketing Association, Director of Data Leadership and Learning at Jig Mail.
Thank you.
Moroney, Co-Founder at Storybook Marketing. James Hurman, Program Director of the Master of Advertising Effectiveness and founder of Previously Unavailable. Justin Lebbon, Co-Founder and Director at MediaTel Events.
Thank you very much for inviting me onto this video series. I appreciate the fact that you want to hear my views and you want to get a lot of views from across the industry on all of these topics that are absolutely essential for driving this industry forward in a positive way. Thank you.
And Sam Diaz, Head of Data Science at Publicis Media. Sam, at a recent conference, you talked about commercial value creation as a more insightful way of thinking about long-term marketing effectiveness. Can you dive deeper into this concept?
So before we start thinking about marketing effectiveness, we need a frame of reference. And this frame of reference, it needs to acknowledge how the different ways that marketing works. And through that framework, you can get to value creation and long-term effectiveness. So what do we mean by long-term effectiveness? Well, one of the ways we think about this is using the iceberg analogy. And as you can see, the iceberg, the very tip of the iceberg that's visible and above the surface of the water, that's your short-run sales effect. That's typically measured through econometrics or modeling. Now, when you go beneath the surface of the water, that's where most of the iceberg, most of the mass and volume of the iceberg exists there. And that's exactly the same with marketing. Beneath the surface of the water, you've got the long-term base effect. And that's a pretty big amount. It's a pretty big layer. And again, modeling and econometrics can capture that. However, below that, further still, you get things like price premium. Now, strong brands can create and sustain price premiums over weak brands. And that's an enormous source of commercial value to brands. Going further, you get the brand extension opportunity. This is about consumer permission. How can brands extend and stretch from one category to another category? And this is happening all the time. Brands are leveraging consumer permission, consumer goodwill to enable them to stretch into new areas, new territories, and realize new cash flow. And this is fundamentally a long-term marketing effect. Beneath that, you get things like barriers to entry, and these are very difficult to measure, but they definitely exist. So when we talk about marketing effectiveness and long-term marketing effectiveness, we should be thinking in this multifactorial, multifaceted way. Think of an iceberg, essentially. And that way, you avoid thinking about short-term returns and then can really focus on long-term effectiveness.
So the way you describe it, commercial value creation is arguably what CEOs, CFOs, and possibly shareholders want. But how large are the layers of the commercial value iceberg, and why does the marketing fraternity continue to focus on short-term ROI?
Well, the first thing to remember, of course, is that most of the iceberg is not visible. So when you try and say how large are these commercial value effects through the different layers, only the tip of the iceberg, the short-term sales effect that you measure through econometric modeling, is actually visible. Most of the iceberg most of value creation is hidden, is latent. But we have some early numbers. The short-term sales effect, measured through econometrics and MMM and test and control methods, is roughly about 10% of value creation. Base sales effects, so the long-term effect on base sales, again measured through techniques like econometrics, that's about 20 to 40% of value creation. But when it comes to price premium, and this is where the real value lies, because price premium is margin straight to the bottom line of the business, that's about 30 to 50% of value creation. That's a big, strong, significant driver of commercial value. And then finally, brand extension opportunities. These are very difficult to measure, and at the moment, how value is being created is very evident, but quantifying that and quantifying marketing's contribution to that is unknown, but we know it's very large indeed. Now, that said, we face a problem. We face a crisis in our industry. Because if you look at where most of the time, energy, effort that's being applied, that's in measuring short-term effectiveness. And really, that's where you can see from the diagram, the value being created is the least. It's only 10%, right? So I believe more effort, more time, more consultancy time and more management time should be spent in really looking at what matters, in really understanding that base sales effect, how price premiums and reducing price elasticity can be created, and long-term brand extension opportunities. And by doing that, you're in a better place to understand value creation. And of course, these come from different techniques. There are different analytical techniques to measure each of these layers. So it's not a one size fits all measurement solution, not at all. It's actually having a plethora of different techniques to tackle each one of these layers, and that's what's important. So, in summary, there's a saying which goes something like, we attach importance to the things we measure, when instead we should be measuring the things that are important. Well, that's exactly how it applies to marketing effectiveness and the iceberg analogy of value creation.
Fabiano, in the age of digital media, we're often bombarded with data from various sources. How can we sift through this sea of data and identify the key metrics that truly measure media effectiveness?
In this data-rich environment, it's easy to get lost. To measure media effectiveness, we need to focus on metrics that align with our business objectives. Look beyond the flashy vanity metrics and focus on outcomes that actually impact your bottom line. Key performance indicators should be carefully selected and include both short-term and long-term metrics, such as sales, market share, profit, brand equity, and loyalty, for example, which provide a holistic view of your media's impact. The moral of the story? Keep focusing on the big picture.
That makes perfect sense, Fabiano. All marketers need to be able to see the big picture and adopt a holistic approach. Ian, how can DMA Databank help to measure campaign effectiveness?
Through the DMA's Awards Databank of 1,500 campaigns, we've identified that there are a whopping 189 different metrics that marketers are using to articulate campaign effectiveness, which is obviously far too many if you're trying to have a consistent and concise conversation with the board about how effective your spend has been. We group these metrics into 4 groups. There are business effects, things like profit growth, shareholder value, that kind of thing. We have brand effects, so consideration, purchase intent. We have response effects, which are the sorts of things that performance marketing is tasked with. And we also have something called campaign effects, like digital vanity metrics and clicks, likes and shares, which aren't really effectiveness metrics at all, but a lot of people are still using them. So look, we're really encouraging people to focus on the stuff that matters. Focus on business, brand and response effects. But really the most important thing to do is start with those business effects and ladder downwards. That's the stuff that the board's going to care about, and that's the stuff that's going to help you defend and grow your budgets when marketing budgets are under more pressure than ever before.
Mark, what is your point of view on the role of data in the context of marketing effectiveness?
For the past 10 years, many marketers, most marketers, have been guided strategically and tactically by data. They look at dashboards all day and decide whether they should tweak, change, or optimize their marketing campaigns. Yes, data is valuable and has a definite role to play, but I believe there's an overemphasis on data. There has been an overemphasis on data, and that the pendulum is swinging back to brand and brand strategy. We need to focus on the customer and what they're telling us, their thoughts, their feelings, their actions. A lot of it has nothing to do with data. A lot of it has to do with their insights and the context that we can pull out of it. Data matters and it plays an integral role in how marketing moves forward, but it has to be mixed with non-data sources. So you've got the qualitative and the quantitative, and that helps marketers make decisions that are relevant, focused on the people that matter, customers and prospects, and at the end of the day, make smarter, faster, better strategic and tactical decisions.
That makes perfect sense, Mark. Fabiano, and on this point, I would also like to hear the opinions of Liam and Ian. Striking a balance between efficiency and effectiveness is crucial for media agencies. Can you share some insights on finding this equilibrium and how it can lead to a more successful campaign?
Absolutely. Efficiency and effectiveness should go hand in hand, but it's not just about cutting costs. To achieve a successful campaign, it's essential to optimize your media mix. While efficiency aims at reducing costs, effectiveness focuses on delivering results. By investing in channels and strategies that resonate with your target audience, you ensure that your campaign not only reaches a broader audience, but also drives meaningful engagements and conversions.
It's such an important question. And I think one of the biggest things we need to do, in fact, is to redefine what efficiency and effectiveness mean. Because the equilibrium is often being looked at an individual ad level. Very often in B2B, when we're running paid media, they're being held to a standard of how much did that ad produce? And we look at that in terms of lead generation, in terms of traffic generation, in terms of pipeline generation. But of course, when you step back and look at the program on a whole, that ad that appears to be very efficient at driving the lowest cost per lead and the highest impact metric possible is actually resulting in a program that is both inefficient and ineffective. It's inefficient in that it's not actually driving towards meaningful outcomes. Most often, a program that's hyper-focused on lead generation is not producing high-quality leads. It's producing large volumes of them. And because so much of the budget is being allocated towards that kind of a behavior, you end up with a program that's not building awareness with the 95% of the audience that are not in market. And it is ineffectively reaching the 5% who are. And by the time it is, there's really not a whole lot of brand awareness behind those to actually move them into the sales process. So ineffectiveness and inefficiency are macro things, not micro level at an individual ad unit. So it involves stepping back, saying, what is the balanced mix of brand awareness efforts, conversion efforts, nurturing efforts, so that we have a program that is effective at a macro level and efficient at a macro level?
For me, it's really important to aim for effectiveness first, efficiency second. You have to ask yourself, what will the board really care about? Do they care about an overall profit growth or a revenue number generated? Or do they care about a CPA value or an ROI value? Again, it's all about what the board care about. I think, one thing to really, perhaps another useful way of thinking about it is actually aim for effectiveness when it comes to your campaign outputs, your campaign outcomes. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? But aim for efficiency with your campaign inputs. What is the efficiency with which you're buying and delivering impressions and attention and all those other hygiene factors that are part of campaign planning. When it comes to campaign outputs, though, aim for effectiveness. But yeah, in terms of hierarchy, effectiveness first, efficiency second.
One of the challenges in measuring media effectiveness is attributing specific outcomes to individual media touchpoints accurately. How can marketers overcome this attribution hurdle and gain a more comprehensive understanding of their media performance?
For many years, attribution was the golden goose for marketers. If they did X, they could tell that Y happened. There was a direct correlation between an action and an outcome. And this made marketing easy in many respects. You combine attribution with data, and marketers had all the information they needed in real time to make decisions that would make a difference, that would move the needle. The problem, however, is that attribution has become increasingly difficult, if not impossible, because while X and Y still matters and it's still relevant, a lot of marketing activity, a lot of sales and marketing activity happens behind the scenes. Dark web, dark social. Customers are having conversations between themselves over social media. They're reading content or consuming content on places like LinkedIn. We live in a zero-click world in which you'll consume content somewhere but never click to the website. There's no signals to a marketer that their content, their marketing is being consumed and it's part of the decision-making process. For many marketers, there is still a place for attribution, but they need to look at other places. They need to be part of communities. They need to increasingly talk to customers and prospects to understand what they're thinking, feeling, and what they're doing. That's how they can tell whether their marketing efforts are working. It's a whole new world for marketing. Attribution is not the beast that it once was. It's not as seductive, it's not as easy, and it's not as much of a tool. Marketers got to learn new skills to find out what's working and why.
So there's a couple of problems with attribution that are worth talking about. Because firstly, what attribution ultimately does is it starts to look at marketing from a linear point of view. These things happened with marketing, and then this outcome preceded those activities. And of course, marketing is a non-linear function compared to sales. Marketing can be things that you see an ad here, you remember it, you recall it down the line. When you're in market, it's something that you bring back to mind as part of your consideration set. It doesn't happen in a linear fashion. And so the more that we judge all of marketing by attribution timelines, the more we prevent the ability to do that longer term, non-linear brand marketing. The other part of attribution that's problematic as well is that it treats marketing like it is a channel. It is looking at how many things came out of those marketing efforts, as opposed to how much efficiency in the overall go-to-market process came as a result of marketing. If you're doing effective brand building, your sales efficiency should get better. You should close more deals. Those deals should close faster. More people will respond to the sales messaging. But that all gets missed if we judge marketing only through an attribution lens. There are types of marketing that is helpful to look at what is occurring, how many things are happening in that sales process, but it is not the only measure of success of marketing. It's important to look at it at the macro. Marketing and brand is the tide that rises all boats.
So, with the decline of third-party cookies, obviously there's a lot of talk about attribution modeling being dead. And I think, third-party cookie-dependent attribution modeling is dead. Attribution modeling, which is based on first-party data, though, still absolutely alive and kicking and really powerful, really powerful tool, as long as you're focusing on multi-touch attribution, of course, and not last click. In terms of, I suppose, of how marketers should think about sort of attributing incremental effects in a more holistic way, think about your sort of 3-year measurement plan and think about what that straw man look like if you are entering into a new market or launching a new product or service or a new startup. Year 1 is going to be all about scale up, performance marketing, mopping up that low hanging fruit in terms of demand, attribution modeling. If you haven't got first party data, then geo or incrementality tests are key. Year 2, perhaps you've mopped up that existing demand, so you're focusing on stimulating future demand with brand spend, invest in a brand tracker and brand uplift studies. Year 3, well, at the end of year 3, you should have 3 years of back data with which to build an econometric model, do lots of nice sort of MMM modeling. And each time that you undergo one of these kind of like new measurement methodologies, you should get an effectiveness multiplier boost, but only if you're feeding those learnings into future campaigns. So it's about coming up with like a really sort of stratified long-term approach about how you're going to build and layer in new measurement methods over time.
Les Binet and Peter Field emphasize the importance of balancing short-term sales activation and long-term brand building. How can we measure the effectiveness of brand building efforts, especially in a landscape that often demands immediate results?
So there's a thing that I do when I talk to audiences about the difference between brand building and generating short-term sales increases. I ask the audience to put up their hand if they are looking to buy a mobile phone in the next week or two. And usually what happens is a few people in the audience put up their hand. And then I ask the audience to put up their hand if they think they'll buy a new mobile phone in the next 2 years. And just about everyone puts up their hand. And the reason that I do that kind of experiment is to illustrate the fact that in any category there are two types of demand. There's what I call existing demand, which is that small group of hands that went up. It's the people that are in the market right now and they're looking to buy. And then there's a much bigger group of what I call future demand. Future demand is the group of people who are not in the category right now, but they will come into the category at some point in future. And that's that big group of people that put up their hands second. Now, marketing has a really critical role to play for both of those groups of customers. We've got one job, which is to convert the existing demand in the market. So get those people that are in the market at the moment to choose us to buy. And that's about generating short-term immediate sales. We've got an equally important job to do with that much bigger group of people who aren't in the market today, but will come into the market in future. We need to build up our brand, make our brand familiar to those people, and hopefully make them feel kind of a positive emotional connection with us so that when they do come into the category, they gravitate towards us. Because what we know is that humans have a familiarity bias. We gravitate towards the things that we're most familiar with, and that's why building brand familiarity is important. And we know that people who have a stronger emotional connection with a brand are more likely to buy it, more likely to spend more money on it. And so that's really the two kind of critical jobs that marketing has to do. And when it comes to measuring those things, obviously we can measure how well we're converting existing demand using performance metrics, right? Using looking at whether we've driven a sales increase, what our cost of acquisition is, what our ROI is, those sorts of things. Those are excellent ways of helping us understand how efficiently we're converting the existing demand in the market. But we need a really different set of metrics to be able to tell us whether we're doing a good job of building the future demand, for our brand or our product. And what we're really looking to understand is whether we are building up that familiarity and that emotional kind of closeness among that group of people who are going to come into the category later. And that's about isolating that group, understanding who they are, and then measuring whether they're feeling more familiar with us or more emotionally positive towards us, so that we have an indication that when they come into the market, they're likely to gravitate towards us and hopefully pay more for us.
We've noticed a really interesting trend with the DMA data bank where actually the effectiveness of performance marketing has been declining over the last few years. It's not to say it's not effective anymore, it's just not quite at the heights it was a few years ago. The economy is definitely something to do with that. While performance marketing still represents the majority of spend, those who are investing in brand marketing are actually seeing more brand effects per campaign than they once were. And so in terms of proving the effectiveness of brand campaigns, well, the brand tracker is obviously essential for establishing your baselines, but you need control versus exposed tests to attribute incrementality to your brand spend. I think the key thing is that we know that brand advertising is about stimulating long-term demand. It's about, it really has a long-term effect. However, if you're trying to sort of convince the board of its effectiveness, I think it's really important to try and find the short-term effects of your brand spend, no matter how small, and no matter how, I suppose, they represent just a small piece of the picture in terms of overall brand impact. But if you can prove short-term effectiveness, whether that be brand metrics, whether that be stimulating, immediate purchase intent or sales, I think that will go a long way to at least giving the business the confidence to defend and grow your brand budgets over time. And also, investing in brand is also going to reverse the decline in performance marketing effectiveness as well. It's only a synergistic approach to brand and response, investing the two together, that will allow you to take advantage of the effectiveness multiplier.
Well, that's a tricky one because brand building is a long-term play and you're usually not going to get immediate results from it. So that means that you can't use the usual performance-based dashboards to measure it. Why? Because most performance marketing tries to get someone to take an immediate action closer towards the point of sale. So that could be downloading a lead magnet, clicking an ad, starting a free trial, adding something to the cart. So these are all sales-related activities that sit closer towards the bottom of the funnel. But brand is a top-of-funnel play. And the goal is not to make someone take action today, but actually introduce them to the brand, make them more familiar with who you are and what you do, and get them to consider you when they are eventually ready to buy whatever you're selling.
What metrics or KPIs would you recommend using to track brand building?
So the metrics or the KPIs that help us understand whether we're building brand are really different from the ones that help us understand whether we're converting sales or converting existing demand as efficiently as we can be. If we're looking at whether we're converting existing demand, metrics like sales, like cost of acquisition, like conversion rates, those sorts of things, they're absolutely excellent at telling us whether we're converting existing demand efficiently. They don't tell us anything at all about whether we're building the brand in the minds of people who will come into the category later, creating future demand. Those metrics don't tell us anything simply because those people who are future demand, they don't show up in today's numbers or tomorrow's numbers. They're not in the category yet. They're not buying. They're not clicking. They're not converting because they're not in the category yet. So we need a different set of metrics to help us understand whether we are building our brand in the minds of those future customers. And that's where brand health tracking comes into play, where we measure things like our awareness, our consideration. We measure certain brand attributes that we know to be important ones that we want to drive for our brand. And so having a brand health tracker alongside your performance metrics is really critical to make sure that we're balancing, we're being efficient in the short term, but we're also building towards more success in the long term. And a tool that I'd really encourage you to check out is TrackSuit. TrackSuit is a brand health tracker. It's a software as a service startup business, which I was involved in starting, and is now available in Australia and New Zealand, the US, the UK, Canada, and a growing number of markets around the world. TrackSuit gives you an amazing, beautiful dashboard of brand health metrics that can go alongside your performance marketing dashboard. It's always on, like performance marketing is always on, and it costs about a tenth to a fifth of what brand health tracking normally costs. So if you'd like to check that out, go to tracksuit.com, and that's a good way to start measuring whether you're creating future demand, whether you're building your brand among that group of customers who will come into the market later.
So there are lots of different models that people might use to measure brand impact. You just got to figure out what works best for you. I mean, you have the classic sort of AIDA model: awareness, interest, desire, action. You have the sort of see, think, do funnel. You just got to figure out which your business is most comfortable with and just pick one. But when it comes to setting sort of KPIs and benchmarks of brand activity, there's lots to consider. Are you a high or low consideration purchase? Where are you in your product life cycle? What are your baseline metrics like? I mean, if you've got 90% prompted brand awareness, it's going to be very hard to shift the dial on that. So perhaps aim for a different metric, like unprompted brand awareness, or aim to shift some metrics which are lower down that brand funnel. If you're sort of low consideration, perhaps actually aiming for an impact on brand consideration might not be a worthwhile sort of endeavor. Perhaps you should be focusing on shifting the dial on purchase intent instead, for example. So it really is an it depends answer, but the key thing is, find a model that works for you as a business. Find a brand funnel that you can all agree with. And we all know that brand funnels don't really exist in reality. It's much messier than that, but they're still a useful way of codifying our thinking. So pick one that works for you, and then just select the metrics that matter, according to a number of quite nuanced considerations relating to product life cycle and other factors as well.
I think the best way to track brand building is by using a brand tracker. It's a survey that you would deliver once or twice a year to a representative sample of your target market. And it would include questions around brand awareness, brand consideration, preference, and purchase, not only for you, but your competitors in the category as well. And it'd also include questions around brand perceptions to see if those shift or change as your brand building initiatives are kind of rolled out across the market. But the problem with brand trackers is that they can be expensive, and you only get results maybe once or twice a year. So if you're looking for something sooner, I like to use Share of Search. Share of Search uses freely available Google Trends data to measure your online branded searches versus all the other competitors in your category. There's a lot of research that's gone into this, and it's shown to be a pretty good proxy for share of market. And I think it's a really quick and easy way to see if your campaign is delivering an immediate lift in awareness and interest in your brand. I think if the goal of brand building is to reach a wider audience, then how do you measure that? I think percent audience reached is a good metric to help you out there. A good rule of thumb for brand, or just advertising in general, is that you're trying to reach about 80% of your TAM, total addressable market, between 1 and 3 times per campaign. So if you take all the impressions of your campaign across all the different platforms and divide that by the total number of people that you're going after in the market, that will give you percent audience reached. I think finally, ad recall is a great way to see if your brand ads are cutting through and actually getting remembered. There's plenty of media and research agencies that can measure this for you, and some channels like Facebook even have it built into the advertising platform itself. So I think to summarize, using a combination of share of search, percent audience reached, and ad recall is a really cost-effective way of seeing if your brand building efforts are reaching enough people, enough times with the right message to be effective in moving the needle on awareness and consideration.
For marketers, the best KPIs or metrics for tracking brand building are elusive because brand is a combination of art and science. There are ways that you can go out and you can measure brand recall, brand recognition, but in many other ways, it's hard to quantify. It's hard to tell how well your brand is doing. A lot of it is anecdotal. A lot of it depends on things that you would never know, that you would never hear, that consumers would never tell you about your brand, even though it may be top of mind for them. You can look at a variety of tools, net promoter scores. When you go on social media, how often is your brand mentioned? How often is the competition mentioned? There's lots of different ways that you can get signals on how often your brand pops up versus the competitors. But I think it's a very elusive creature that marketers have to get their heads around. One of the things I talk about when I'm doing brand positioning and brand strategy is that ROI can be difficult. It can be hard to tell how effective these exercises are because there's lots of different ways to get at it, to understand whether it's working or not. It requires a leap of faith that building your brand and embracing brand strategy matters. It's important, especially in a very competitive world where differentiation is not a nice to have, but an absolute need to have. I don't know what the easy answer is to that, other than brand is important. There are different ways you can measure brand, and that you should be always looking to enhance and grow your brand.
Richard, creativity is a key success factor in advertising. How does creativity play a pivotal role in driving deeper engagement and marketing effectiveness?
Creativity isn't just about making something good looking or witty, although that is important. It's about making something that cuts through, something that truly resonates. Work that sticks in your head isn't easy to create, but when you infuse creativity into your marketing, you can do more than just sell a product or service. You become a storyteller, and people love stories. They remember them, and if you're lucky, they might even share them. That's the power of engagement. But it's not just about capturing attention, it's about holding it. And that's where effectiveness comes in. In today's always-on social mobile world, consumers are bombarded with messages. So what can we do to get people to stop scrolling, lean in and say, oh, that's different, new or surprising? When you engage your audience on a deeper level, you're not just selling to them, you're building a relationship. And that's where the magic happens for marketing effectiveness. Because when people feel connected to your brand, they're more likely to buy from you or recommend you. Creativity isn't just a nice to have, it's the driving force behind deeper engagement and marketing effectiveness.
Well said, Richard. Ian, should marketers be measuring the impact of creativity on marketing effectiveness?
So with the DMA's data bank, we're seeing a real impact of creativity on effectiveness. It perhaps is unsurprising, but brand campaigns are far more likely to be scored as highly creative by judges than response campaigns are. It's perhaps no coincidence as well that over the last few years we've seen response campaign effectiveness decline while brand campaign effectiveness improves. I think people think that response campaigns can't necessarily be creative. They don't necessarily shift the dial on emotion. They're all about rational thinking. If you go back to Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and thinking slow, I think, your traditional big integrated agencies would probably disagree with that. They used to be the home, or still are the home of creative thinking and driving tangible response from consumers. So I think it's a bit of a cop-out to say that response advertising can't be creative. I think it's really important to use creativity to drive not just brand effects, but drive real responses from consumers as well. So yeah, very important to measure creativity.
Indeed, there is no doubt that creativity plays a key role and has a significant impact. In relation to this very topic, as we know, Walk launched a framework for building a culture of creative effectiveness at Cannes last year, which I recommend to all our listeners. In terms of marketing effectiveness, the ad copy also holds considerable importance. Francesca, what is exactly ad copy? And what are the key elements of compelling ad copy in paid media advertising?
Great question. Think back to the last time you scrolled through Google on your phone. If it's anything like me, it was a few minutes ago. Chances are you came across a paid ad or two above the fold. If ad copy is done right, you read new copy, like free shipping, up to 50% off, new styles added, alongside creative that really caught your eye from your favorite retailer, and it made you add a product to cart. Ad copy convinces a potential customer to take a specific action. And there are a few key elements of ad copy that really add up to strong engagement. And strong copywriters should keep a few things in mind. First, framework. What are the goals of the customer? Second, brand voice. How does your ad copy embody a brand identity? And then third, relevance. Who are you talking to and why? Fourth, clarity and conciseness. And then lastly, CTA, or call to action. Tell your audience what action to take next.
As mentioned, striking a balance between efficiency and effectiveness is crucial for media agencies, and the same is true for copywriting. Can you share some insights on finding this equilibrium and how it can lead to a more successful ad campaign?
Of course. Strong copy really helps keep a user engaged and drive conversion. And it's really a balance between authentic copy, especially in the age of AI, and specific SEO keywords and terminology that then come together to drive conversion. So if your ad copy doesn't highlight strong value propositions or align with your brand voice, or honestly maximize space with SEO keywords, chances are that it won't stick with your customer. And while there's no secret formula for writing the perfect ad, there are a few things that balance efficiency and effectiveness. For example, you need to know what your target market wants and speak to it. Think free shipping for an e-commerce consumer. Also, don't forget to add a number, or three, honestly. Stats, trademarks, and figures are proven to increase CTR, and always maximize character count. You should use all available space. Google Ads, for instance, gives you 3 30-character headlines plus 2 90-character descriptions. You need to pack all of the information and SEO keywords you can all in one place. And lastly, use creative CTAs to build community. I prefer to lead with a strong verb. Think save now, join today. Make your customer want to join the brand community that you are building.
What approach would you suggest to get a comprehensive understanding of copy effectiveness?
So imagine you're not quite sure what your target customer base cares more about. Free shipping or a higher discount off of a popular product. You can just A/B test it. So A/B testing is really key to establishing an understanding of copy effectiveness. And when writing CTA copy or writing ad descriptions, it really can be tempting to try and guess what will make people click. But instead of basing your copy decisions on what sounds right or on a feeling, you can try A/B testing to see what the data says. A/B testing basically is a method of comparing two or more versions of content, like an ad, to see what performs better. And you can test different versions of copy, headlines, CTAs, and even images. You can also test the placement of CTAs or baked-in copy on a creative asset. Why not get the data points to prove to your teams and your clients what copy is resonating? And then the best part is you can build off of past wins to drive future results.
Justin, in light of the key industry conferences, seminars, and events about media and advertising themes across the globe, where you had the opportunity to talk to the most important leaders in the industry, from your point of view, how important is marketing effectiveness in reality?
Great question. Obviously, the answer is very, but I think the main question here is how robustly is marketing science followed within clients these days? I think it's questionable at best, and I just want to caveat that many of the brand managers and media managers that are predominantly from larger organizations that I tend to speak with aren't trying to ignore this. They understand this. I just think it's modern marketing that gets in the way, and it's how I like to put it, the great hoax that Silicon Valley has played on the marketing community. That's this myth that every penny of advertising leads to some sort of result that is measurable and accountable, that someone will see an ad and spend. So we have this situation where media is climbing all over each other with accountability and misattribution metrics to claim they have delivered a sale or something like that. And it's all nonsense, in my view. Previously it was clicks, and to some extent it still is, sales, etc. But now we have a new fancy word for it, which is outcomes. And now outcomes, why I think it's a really smart word, is that it can mean a whole world of things, brand KPIs, footfall, etc. But generally, I'm seeing it means sales, and it drives more and more short-termism within clients, and obviously this greater push into sort of performance marketing. Now this is despite all the expert views, papers, warnings, case studies of clients that have gone down this sort of narrow path and destroyed their long-term profitability. Adidas and the AA are case studies that spring to mind. I do think this topic varies geographically. Interestingly, I think the rest of the world has a particular strong appetite for effectiveness work and execution. I find that the US don't really focus on it a great deal. I think that the narrative there is overrun a lot by digital. And you talk a lot about performance and outcomes. And I think what illustrates this to me is when you go to the US or go to the events in the US, there's never a marketing effectiveness expert on stage. Instead, the US seem to be really keen on having people like Gary Vee talk about his thoughts and feelings, and he never brings empirical research to what he says. Yet the entire market there seems enraptured with whatever he says. But perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps the US are right to lead this path. Perhaps effectiveness experts are wrong too. So just going to cap off with a couple of views here. I'm going to illustrate how Les Binet describes how advertising works. According to him, advertising maintains sales margins by slightly increasing chance that people will choose your brand. Imagine trying to sell that concept to a CFO today. By making that brand easy to think of and buy, and by creating positive feelings and associations towards it. And this is via broad reach ads that people find interesting and enjoyable, and targeted activation that they find relevant and useful. In the modern era, who's really following sort of those principles? And one person I like to talk to is a guy called Brian Weezer. He's ex-Group M, and he's a great analyst in this industry. He follows media spend and what brands are up to. And media spend is generally on the rise. Most of it, if not all of it, going to the platforms and performance media or news spend. And I always ask him this, like, why are clients putting more and more money down this path and not looking at sort of long-term effectiveness? And he always says that, Justin, you're being naive, you're being a bit daft here. If CMOs were really that keen on effectiveness and what really works, they'd be spending more money on flyers being mailed to households and radio. But how daft would a CMO look if he turned up to a board meeting, say he's increasing spend in these mediums? So it's about what's new and what's shiny and what's fancy and what's fashionable, and that's what keeps them in a job. And it's hard to disagree with him.
Are we as an industry focusing on the right things?
No, the industry does a terrible job focusing on the most important issues within this industry, because most of them are issues that we just don't want to deal with. I think fraud is probably one of the biggest ones. Bob Hoffman just released a book. It's a free download. And for anyone who reads it, it should scare the shit out of you. One of the main points that we should look at in this is, despite all his insights and research, we can't even define how big the market is for fraud. 80 billion, 160 billion. We know it's in the billions, and we know it's bad, and we know it's big, but we don't seem to, as an industry, really want to get hold of it and do something about it. Data. We talk about this all the time, but do we talk about the quality of data? Do we talk about what this data is doing? You hear that Facebook has 500 points of data on 12-year-olds in every single country. And that's just staggering. Is that a good thing for the industry? Should we really be having that? JP Morgan are moving into the advertising world. This is very recent news because they've figured out a way of being able to sell data from their client base to advertisers. Should we be doing that? Is this data any good? Is it really adding value to your business? Walled gardens and the dominance of platforms and what that is doing around the world for domestic media within all those countries. New Zealand is a good example. There's newsrooms closing there, big ones as well from large domestic incumbent broadcasters. These news organizations, which basically helps fuel democracy within these countries, are no longer sustainable, and it's happening everywhere. When you look at where new spend or new media money dollars is flowing, it's to the platforms. How big do clients want Google, Meta, Amazon to be? How many options do they want in all these other markets that they are operating in? But do we ever talk about that? No, we don't. And these big platforms are very tightly controlled walled gardens, and they're becoming more and more opaque with their insights and their data and how they actually service the market and the industry with the information that they're gathering. But do we talk about that? No, it's too boring. Do we talk about advertising effectiveness enough? I don't think so. I mean, we talk about this quite a bit. Is it interesting? Can you fill rooms with it? It's actually quite tough. I mentioned all the other things. They're hard also to fill a room with at a conference on those topics. But it's hard to get experts out there talking about it. It's hard to get the research. It's expensive to get the research. And ultimately, how much interest is there in that? I'm not too sure that there is enough because, it's not as interesting, it's not as fancy, it's not as shiny, it's not as fashionable to talk about all these other things that are going on in the market.
Valuable insights. Thank you, Justin. Finally, Fabiano, considering the dynamic nature of the media industry, how can data leaders adapt and innovate their measurement strategies to stay ahead in the game?
As data leaders, agility and adaptability are crucial traits. Embrace the power of AI and machine learning to derive meaningful insights from the vast amount of data available. Leverage data analytics tools to optimize your media mix continuously and stay on the top of the latest trends and technologies in the industry. Remember, the key to success lies not just in gathering data, but in interpreting it smartly to inform your media decisions effectively.
Fantastic insights, Fabiano. Thank you so much to all the experts for joining us today and shedding light on the art of media effectiveness and long-term brand building. And if you're curious about how to run experiments to improve your marketing campaigns, stay tuned for our next episode where we will discuss the test and learn approach in marketing. You don't want to miss it.